Hello everyone, my name is John Yates Harold and I'm really proud to be here to share my story as part of the Outing the Past celebrations for LGBT+ History Month 2022. I like to start with a trigger warning just to say that I will be talking about some very personal stuff to me. And if this does trigger anything in you, please do take some time out just to get yourself together, look after yourself, put yourself first. That's really important. Music has been a massive part of my life virtually since day one. And a song that really resonates with me is from the Sondheim musical Follies. It's called I'm Still Here. And it basically says, you know, good times and bum times, I've seen them all, and my dear, I'm still here. And that really is very much something that has been a thread throughout my life. I was born in Salford near Manchester in June 1966, and you can see me here walking up the street with my mum. I was absolutely devoted to my mum. In this picture you can see that my mum is pregnant with what would be my younger sister, so I was the middle child of three. My parents were married for well over 40 years, absolutely devoted to each other, and so home life was pretty stable. I was very, very lucky. Both parents were very devoted to each other and devoted to us, their three kids. They worked really, really hard to provide for us throughout our lives. Mum was the PA to a director of a lighting firm in Manchester. She helped him set the business up and then stayed with him as the business grew. Dad, before I arrived on the scene, was in the Merchant Navy, travelled the world, and then settled down once his children started arriving, and often had 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So he was a little bit of an absent father, but you know, we didn't ever go without anything, and Christmases and birthdays were always very happy times. Both parents were strict. We knew where we stood with them, and that provided all three of us with a very firm foundation as we were growing up. So really important, stable family life. I was very close with my maternal grandmother, my nana, more so than my dad's parents, who were quite distant. But I got my love of music from my nana. There was always music around. She was always playing the piano. She played piano for silent movies in Salford, and then played piano really throughout her life and ended playing in pubs. She was very, very entertaining, and I was absolutely devoted to my nana. She passed away when I was 17, and that really affected me quite badly. So I joined nursery when I was 3, and then primary school when I was 4. The primary school literally was across the road from the nursery, and I remember being dragged into school kicking and screaming on the second day. My poor mother, what everybody must have thought about her, dragging this child who was just, I was sobbing my heart out. I was terrified. And you know, I only thought we had to go to primary school for a day, and then having to go in for subsequent days was just like I was being abandoned, and you know, in this strange place with these strange people around me. Managed to kind of settle in, I guess. I remember my first Christmas where the teacher had put up crepe paper decorations around the room, and I got a squeezy bottle full of water and I'm told squirted the decorations down and ended up having to get a mop and spent playtimes and lunch times mopping the classroom. Happy days. But yeah, I knew I was different particularly to the other boys, because I didn't like football, I didn't like rough and tumble, I didn't like anything that they liked to do. I spoke properly, I dressed, you know, very well presented and very clean and tidy, and top buttons done up and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, I was ostracized, tried desperately to fit in. And there's a fantastic book that I often read now to kids called Something Else, and that really does tell my life story, particularly at primary. Desperate to fit in, desperate to be like the other kids. I remember I must have been possibly about 5, not much older than that at all, and sitting on the sink. It was a metal draining board, and I was sitting on the sink as my mother was washing me in the sink, and asking her, "Mum, what does fairy mean?" And her saying, where have you heard that? Who's called you that? And so, well, it's what the other boys are calling me. And she said, "Oh, just ignore them." And of course, it was language like that was used against me throughout primary, by the other boys. And I can remember a lot of the names of those children who used those words, who were sitting in this picture, who followed me up to secondary and continued to make my life hell. I was very, very academic. That was kind of my refuge. I loved learning. It was a place of safety for me, because you could count on facts, you know, and I loved my teachers, loved learning everything, even maths. And my music teachers, I had Mr. Rudowski, who taught me piano when I started lessons when I was 4, and Mrs. De Silva, who was this glamorous Sri Lankan music teacher who just developed such a love of playing the recorder and percussion instruments, and again, that made me different to the other boys. And you know, I have a very clear memory of wearing an orange and white tracksuit for playing football. This was part of PE lessons. This was absolutely nothing that I chose to do myself. You know, orange and white tracksuit. It was the 70s, so you know, apologies for that, but there you go. So I would go out onto the field feeling very apprehensive, while all these boys were, you know, they knew what to do. It seemed to be in their DNA. They knew how to play football, and I had just a very vague sort of theoretical idea of what to do. And I would come in at the end of the session with my pristine orange and white tracksuit bottom with not a mark on it, because I'd done the Cinderella. I'd run away from the ball, and that kind of typified my primary school life. Here I am with my older sister. She's 4 years older than me, and again, she's very, very academic, continues to be even now. And then with my younger sister, who is the exact opposite to my older sister in the fact that she always was very sporty, very much daddy's girl, where I was very much my mummy's boy. But we had a difficult relationship growing up, but now we're best of friends. So leaving primary, I went into the even more hostile world of secondary school. And there you can see me, second from the left, front row. Gosh, if I knew I was different in primary, that was even more heightened at secondary. You know, throw hormones into the mix, and there you go. The bullying that I'd experienced at primary got worse at secondary. I was verbally and physically bullied all the way through secondary, by older lads, younger lads, and you know, anybody who kind of saw me as the victim, I guess. Music and my studies were very much my refuge. And again, this set me apart from most of the other lads. I was top in my year academically, but because I didn't play sport, I never got head boy. Not that I'm bitter much, but there you go. My overriding emotion at secondary is fear. I was absolutely terrified, and this manifested itself in a lot of gut problems. I had a very nervous stomach. Never ever would use the toilets because they were a place where you could be cornered and attacked, and this caused sort of lifelong health issues. The stress and anxiety that I went through at secondary caused me to have a period of extended sickness with glandular fever and various other things, which I never fully recovered from in secondary. And it always manifested itself through my stomach. And as I say, this is something I've lived with throughout my life. Secondary was absolutely vile. It was horrendous. The only thing that gave me any pleasure was music. That enabled me to kind of, it was a very solitary kind of existence, I guess, finding comfort in music, spending a lot of time alone in my room listening to music, and as I say, it's the only thing that kind of gave me any pleasure. I played flute for many years in the school band and loved it. Didn't like anything that was going to expose me though, so I hated playing solos. I hated playing in assemblies, and I would get really nervous. I had some friends in the band, those boys sitting either side of me. You can see me there on the right with my flute. The boys either side of me were friends, and we connected through music. But really, apart from those two, I had no one else really to kind of turn to for help or support. No one to talk to at all about what I was experiencing, because to talk to people about what I was going through would have meant exposing myself as being gay, and that was like nothing that I ever could have done. I grew up with a really shameful attitude to being gay, and again, that was not only shaped by those around me, family, friends, acquaintances, the media. We were, as gay people, we were figures of fun. We were Larry Grayson and John Inman, which I would get called quite a lot. And I looking back on it, I was camp. I was what you might call effeminate, and I thought I was hiding it. I thought my mask was so good that no one could see that. But looking back on it, who was I kidding? Everybody saw it. Everybody knew that I was gay long before I'd come to terms with it and accepted it. And I remember there was a lad who shouted at me from one end of the school field to the other, "Oi, Yates, you homo!" And I remember thinking, what are they calling me a brand of washing powder for? I didn't know that homo was anything to do with me and who I was. They all knew the words to describe me, and my God, did they use them. They would call me Quentin. How did they know about Quentin Crisp before I did? And I thought, here's me as somebody just coming to terms with being gay, and they all knew about all these people. They told me that Freddie Mercury was gay, and he'd called his group Queen because Queen was slang for effeminate gay men. Why did I not know that? Why was I only picking these things up as little snippets of information, little glimmers of hope that there were people out there like me, who weren't just on TV, who weren't just in London. As I say, I grew up in Manchester. At that time, Manchester had one gay pub. Now, if you know Manchester, you know we're overrun with gay pubs, LGBT plus pubs, which is brilliant. But then there was one, and it was like, oh, we don't go in there because you'll never come out again. And that whole sort of horrendous stereotype of gay men as predatory animals, and pouncing on young boys, and all that horrendous, nasty, pernicious, vile stereotype that was used against us. But that's the kind of atmosphere and environment that I was growing up in, and it was awful. It was a nightmare. So I grew up with that real sense of shame, of embarrassment, of hatred of myself, of real internalized homophobia, even though I didn't know it at the time, couldn't label it as that. And it's taken most of my life to kind of work through that and get over it. So I left secondary, moved to sixth form, didn't go to the local one, went to one a bit further away from most of the kids from my school who had gone up to the sixth form. Did music, really started coming to terms with being gay, came out to a friend, went back in the closet again, couldn't remember who I'd told and who I could be myself with, and all that kind of stuff. Was getting through all these crushes, and it was a really confusing time, and trying to study for my A-levels was an absolute nightmare. And I remember failing all my mock A-level exams, and really giving myself a good talking to, so Christmas 1983, when I was 17 and 17 and a half or so, had a massive argument with my younger sister. I'd developed this crush on this lad, which was unrequited, and just ended up sitting at the dining table with a bottle of pills and a bottle of gin. I looking back, I think I'd taken maybe 10 pills, and my younger sister came in, luckily found me, put everything away, put me to bed. It was a cry for help, but it was never spoken about, and it was something I never dealt with at the time. Again, if I'd had to deal with it, it would have meant owning up to family that I was gay, and I was, going through all this stuff at sixth form, and I couldn't have done that. As much as I knew my parents loved me, and as much as part of me maybe possibly suspected they might have known, there was nothing ever said. So sixth form was basically a continuation of primary and secondary for me. The bullying was only verbal, so the physical bullying had stopped, which was a good thing. But as I say, I went through all this sort of identity crisis, I guess you might say. Anyway, that low point was what I needed to kind of get me through and make me really focus on what I was doing and work really hard. And I ended up passing 3 of my A-levels, which was just enough to get me through, to get me into teacher training down in London. So I went to lots of different universities on the interviews, didn't get in any of them. And then I was told about Middlesex Polytechnic in North London, and that was all I needed to know. It was in London, didn't care about anything else. Went for an interview, really went for it and absolutely loved it. Was accepted, and so in the September of 1984 my parents took me down to Middlesex Polytechnic in North London and abandoned me. Again, it was primary school all over again. It was, you know, and I remember sitting on my bed after they'd left and just crying because I felt so alone and so frightened, didn't know what to do and all this kind of stuff. You know, things did get a little bit easier and a little bit better. Meeting the other students. Again, I didn't really fit in. I wasn't like the other, you know, teacher trainees at the time. I thought I was the only gay person in the world, as many of us often do when we're growing up. But I knew I was in the right place. I knew being in London was the right place for me, because that's where all the gay clubs and where all gay people in the world lived, you know. And so I would spend my weekends walking around mainly central London, getting to know the place. I was a massive Soft Cell fan, and they sang a lot in the early days about Soho. So Soho, it was a place of pilgrimage for me. I absolutely loved it. Found some people who I might have suggested were part of my tribe, but loved it. Loved being in London. And not long after I started at Middlesex, I came out. Naively thought I would be accepted. This was London and I would be accepted and unquestioning, and I could become who I always thought I was. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Many of the lecturers didn't like the idea of a gay teacher and somebody who was very openly gay as a teacher, and they did everything they possibly could to make things very, very difficult. I was told at the end of my first year to go and take a year out, which I didn't do. I was made to feel very uncomfortable. Let's say that. And under no uncertain terms was I to ever tell anybody that I was gay, and you know, all that kind of stuff, all those sort of outdated stereotypes, as I've kind of mentioned already. I was very accepted amongst some of the friends that I had, which was great. I was also, as I say, able to kind of become more me, and become more the person that I knew that I was. So after I'd been at college for a term and I went home for Christmas, I came out to my mum, and initially got a good reception, and then it sort of wasn't too good after that. But I could see now that she was kind of struggling with it. I think a lot of her struggle was around telling my dad. So she didn't tell my dad. I certainly didn't tell my dad. She didn't tell my dad till about 6 months after I came out to her. And his response was absolutely brilliant. He said, "Oh, I always knew. I'd come across men like him in the Navy." And in subsequent years, the kind of stories that he would come out with were amazing, and I just wish that he'd told me some of those stories when I was growing up and struggling. But anyway, we could laugh about it when I was much older, and he would tell me his Navy stories. So I came out Christmas 84 I should say, went back to London, left my mum to kind of deal with it, and started my first long-term relationship, and ended up moving in with this lovely man who was 7 years older than me, and we had a 3-year relationship which saw me virtually towards to the end of my degree course, which was great. My final year was interesting. It was the year when it was the great hurricanes in the UK, and I was on teaching practice, and that was difficult to travel and a horrendous time. But I had come across another guy in college who worked in the student union bar, who I absolutely fell madly in love with, and did my teaching practice, and then going back to college, fell even more in love with this guy, left my relationship, which was probably a good idea at the time, and finished my degree course in this second relationship, which was really direct contrast to my previous boyfriend. But this was 1988. This was an interesting time because I moved almost back into halls again in North London, and got through the 6 months at the end of my degree, graduated with a 2:1, which was wonderful, really pleased with that, and then started work at a school, and they had me working for the last month or so of the school term, so that I would be paid over the summer, which was very generous of them. And this was the Argyle Primary School. And this was a school in King's Cross in central London, part of what was then the Inner London Educational Authority, ILEA. And this is the school where Kenneth Williams went as a child when it was Manchester Street School. And you can just see on the very top of the building there was a roof playground. There was all the railings around it. And there's a photograph in the Kenneth Williams diaries of him in a play costume on the roof playground. So that was wonderful. Such an amazing connection. Now, 1988 was the year that Section 28 came out. Now, Section 28 was a clause in the local government bill that forbade the promotion of homosexuality as a lifestyle choice, some wording along those lines. Brought in by Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government at the height of the AIDS crisis. So, you know, talk about kicking us when we were down. I'd come out of college with the idea that I was going to be an openly gay teacher, and it was, you know, all that kind of stuff. Section 28 kind of silenced many of us who were LGBT teachers at that time, and I'd gone through a really horrendous time in that last year at college with homophobic tutors and trying to kick me out and all that kind of stuff. So I had to kind of prove that I was better than anybody else, and you know, graduated anyway. You know, moved on from college, started work in this school, and there were 3 other gay men on the staff. So it was like all the things that college had told me about, you can't be open, you can't tell anybody about your sexuality and be a gay teacher, and here were 3 other openly gay men on the staff. Now, this school was really interesting. It was the makeup was about 98% Bangladeshi families, so Muslim families, and it really was, the whole place was like a family. It was an amazing place, celebrating Eid, all these festivals I'd kind of never heard of, and celebrating Eid and all these kinds of things was absolutely incredible. It was a really rich cultural learning environment for me, and I absolutely loved it. My very first class, you know, when you think now that classes are 30 plus, my very first class had 17 children in it, and only one of them could speak English, which was completely different to how I'd been trained at college. So all the lesson plans and everything I'd written for that half term I kind of threw out and had to start from scratch. And this was in the days before the national curriculum, so you know, it was really, really interesting that we could teach what the kids actually needed. which was great. But it was, you know, it was amazing. I had 5 very, very happy years there. But yeah, Section 28 cast a long shadow. It stopped many teachers being out. Me being bloody minded, it wasn't going to stop me, and I was going to scream it from the rooftops, which was virtually what I did, or at least in the staff room. But it also stopped many teachers supporting their LGBT students, and there are students at the time who I come across now as adults who very much say, you know, we went through all this stuff, we didn't get any support, and we now know why we didn't get that support. A lot of resources were brought out that were adapted and changed and made into sort of very negative things, very negative portrayal of LGBT plus people. I was very lucky in that school to have amazing staff, and I was really accepted, and I could finally relax about being gay, and it was great. The school was about 5 minutes walk away from a bookshop that became my haven, the Gays the Word bookshop, where I would spend many lunchtimes perusing the books. And you know, it was at the time when it was still quite a, you know, a difficult thing to be openly gay, so to go to this bookshop was for me making a massive statement, and I was so proud of doing it, of actually walking through the door and picking up books and reading them. And oh, it was an oasis, it was a haven, such an amazing place. So the kind of experience that I had at this school was a direct contrast to the relationship that I was in. So cast your mind back, I'd left my previous boyfriend for this bloke who worked at the student union bar. He turned out to be alcoholic, turned out to be violent. I finished my first week at Argyle with a black eye, and this kind of got worse over the next sort of 18 months, to the point where in April of 1990 I came very close to being killed, basically, without being too melodramatic. My boyfriend rearranged my face, and I was sent home to Manchester to recover. My head teacher at Argyle was absolutely incredible, paid my train fare and everything, and just said, you know, you are not to come back till you are recovered. So I spent a while at home. My parents and my younger sister put me back together again, and were absolutely amazing. It was basically a 2.5 year relationship that was a living hell in every way, shape or form, you know, which has kind of led me very much into the work that I do now, but I'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, so April 1990, I finally left my violent boyfriend and started putting my life together, and decided to go and do some volunteer work at London Friend, but I'll tell you about that in a moment. So I volunteered at London Friend, ended up running in a very, very short space of time, ended up running their Thursday night men's group. And one evening in late June, I opened the door to this man who had come along to the group for friendship and support, made him a cup of tea, gave him a biscuit, and stood with him for 3 hours and told him my entire life story. And he came back the following week. I hadn't put him off, which was amazing. And having come out of that really sort of disastrous 2.5-year relationship to being on my own for a period of time and not needing and not looking for anybody else, to have this man stumble into my life at that time was just what I needed without realizing it. You know, here we are 32 years later, and we're still together, and he is my rock, he is my life, he is my foundation, he is the reason I do everything that I do. He is the reason I am the person I am today. That's my Steve. Absolutely most amazing man I've ever met. I carried on performing while I was teaching. Left Argyle because I thought I was going to be doing more performing and writing and stuff. Did a lot of performing. Started with my friend on my in the right of this photograph on my left. My friend Louis started the London Gay Men's Choir. We hit the heady heights of supporting the Pet Shop Boys. We were the choir bits in Go West at the London Palladium at a fundraising benefit for this new charity that was being started called Stonewall, which was amazing. The week after, the choir went up to Manchester to perform in my hometown. They performed a Requiem Mass that I had written. You know, the most irreligious, I don't know what you call it, person writing a Requiem Mass, and there you go. The choir performed it, and absolutely incredible, massive highlight of my life. I'll never forget running out on the stage in the Palladium to sing with the Pet Shop Boys. I'll never forget the feelings of warmth from the audience hearing my Requiem Mass. Undying Heart, a Requiem for AIDS, it was called. And you know, my dad, who was never demonstrative really, couldn't really express his emotions, but the day after the performance he said, "So did you write all those notes then?" Which my mum interpreted as him being very proud of what I'd done, and it was a massive achievement, something I'm really am proud of even now. I also edited a book of poetry at that time, which I still think it's on Amazon. A little bit difficult to get hold of, but it's still there. Something I'm very proud of. In between the movements of the Mass, these poems were read to music, or they were sung, and they were, you know, I wrote all the songs anyway, all the music. Coming back down to earth with a bang, realizing that I wasn't going to be the massive success I thought I was going to be as a writer or performer. I ended up doing supply work. Ended up at a school in northeast London, in a place called Hyams Park, which is a very leafy suburb of Chingford. For those people who do have any kind of political knowledge, the local MP was Norman Tebbit. And his portrayal on Spitting Image at the time was an understatement. Yes, but anyway, lovely school. Had a bit of homophobia from some of the kids as I was walking between the school and the bus stop, which the head teacher very swiftly dealt with. He was this big sort of rugby player type, and we got on like a house on fire. Absolutely amazing man, Pete Froud, absolutely incredible man. He basically headhunted me. He said, "I don't want you as a supply, I want you working for me full time," which was a real sort of accolade for me, a real sort of, you know, really kind of felt he wanted me, and to be wanted at that time was amazing in teaching. And he was just incredible. He was a support for me from day one. So Steve and I at this point had been together 6 years, and we moved into our first home together. that we bought, and our neighbours were a rock band, and they were a rock band comprising of 5 or 6 women and 1 man. And gradually, as we kind of got to know them over a couple of months, discovered that they were of varying different sexualities, gender identities, which was amazing. You know, I'm very much a believer that people come into your life for a reason, and these came into my life and they made me really kind of examine what it meant to be gay, and to laugh at myself and have a bit of a sense of humour about it, and not take myself too seriously, and be really proud of myself. But after we'd known them a little while, a couple of months, I invited them into school to come and play, and they turned up one afternoon and played a set of really heavy rock songs, virtually those songs that make your ears bleed. Couldn't hear the lyrics. All we could hear was, you know, this loud, oh, it was incredible. It was, you know, the kids were up and rocking, and it was brilliant. Literally, as the last note sounded, this photographer appeared. Now, we had a really good relationship with the local press, so we thought he was from the local press. And he was taking photos, and he took a photo of me with the band, and he took the band and all this kind of stuff. And then the media descended, and it was, gosh, Sky News, ITV, BBC, every possible news station you could think of. And I was having cameras thrust into my face, and don't you think it's disgusting what these girls do? And you know, why are you having them in primary school? And all I knew was that they were a rock band, and they'd just played an amazing set of songs, and the kids had loved it, and the kids were buzzing, and it was, you know. So that was the Monday afternoon. The Tuesday morning, I was on the front page of The Sun with the headline, "Lesbians play to kids aged 8. Fury at gay sir's kinky lesson." So, turns out the girls had a very raunchy stage act, which I didn't know anything about. The way they dressed on stage, or didn't dress on stage, was totally different to how they presented themselves to the kids. The songs that they'd sung, apparently they'd changed the lyrics to make them more acceptable. Couldn't hear the lyrics. They'd even changed the name of their group. They called themselves Rocky Beach. Now, apparently their stage name was Rock Bitch. Google them, you'll come across some interesting images. You know, what had turned out to be a completely innocent event had been, and I'll use the word, perverted by the press, and it had been really blown up out of all proportion. And, you know, as I say, front page of The Sun on the Tuesday, editorial in The Sun on the Wednesday. On the Thursday, our local paper redressed the balance, and they were brilliant. And on the Friday, Norman Tebbit said that I should take a long walk off a short pier. Because who was I to bring this filth into primary schools, and who was I as a performing arts teacher? He didn't have performing arts teachers, and look at how he's turned out, which kind of said a lot, really, doesn't it? But anyway, it was the most horrendous time. I had the worst homophobia from basically anybody outside school. We were flooded with hate mail, people writing from all over the world to say how disgusting I was, how I should be sacked, death threats, the works. I could no longer take the bus to and from school because of the abuse I was getting on the bus and in the bus stop. Couldn't use the local shops because, again, I was getting abuse from shopkeepers. I guess a positive thing came out of that in the fact that I learnt to drive, because I had to get to and from school. The head teacher paid for me for a couple of months to get a taxi to and from school, which was brilliant. As I say, he was supportive all the way through. Chair of Governors was very supportive, and I kept my job and ended up staying an extra 3 years. And you know, it was an awful time, but the kids were amazing. I remember going into school, into my year 5 class on the Tuesday morning when the kids had all seen the front page of the Sun, and the kids saying to me, "So is it true, sir? Are you gay?" And I said, "Yeah." And they turned round and they said, "We don't care. We love you anyway." And that, oh gosh, that was absolutely amazing. That was justification and comfort for all the years I'd been through at school and college and everything, saying you can't be a gay teacher and it's wrong and all this kind of stuff. And here was a bunch of kids telling me that it was okay. And they were brilliant. They kept going around wearing badges saying "Rock on, John," and all this kind of stuff. I had all these big hairy tattooed dads coming in with chocolates and flowers, and there was only one parent who wasn't on board with it, but enough about that. That's about as much as I'm going to say about him. That's all he deserves. But it was difficult. As much as there were all these lovely comments, it was difficult because I found myself walking around the West End, and you kind of see these films where people are sort of paranoid and whatever, and I found myself like that and thinking, who's seen me on the front of the paper? Who knows who's going to be nasty? Who's going to be all right? I had people contacting me saying, "Oh, we were in Spain and we saw you on the front of the paper." And it's like, oh God, So it was personally a difficult time. That level of control was taken away from me as to coming out, and it was everybody knew, and I didn't know who knew and who didn't, and who'd seen me, and who was going to be all right. I suppose the long-term thing in there was that I could finally be my authentic self, and I didn't have to feel I was hiding any part of me. And I often talk about this in the training that I do now, how important it is to bring your authentic self, your whole self, 100% of yourself to your job, because it makes you do your job to the very best of your ability. And I found, because there was no secrets, there was no hiding, that I was doing my very best job finally. That something so awful and so horrendous that had been completely innocently done, and maybe naively you might think, but I'd done it with the very best intentions, and the kids got so much out of it, and yet it was blown up and made into something sordid and seedy and disgusting, and it was nothing like that at all. So the rock band and us became really good friends, and they lived next door to me for another couple of years before moving on. Yeah, interesting time to say the least. So I left this wonderful school, Selwyn, in Christmas '99. Did a bit more supply. And then, there's the girls. That's a tame picture of the girls. Anyway, I was still performing, still writing, doing stuff at London Lighthouse all the way through all this. Ended up at a school called George Tomlinson in Leytonstone in London, East London, where Steve and I lived, and was very, very much myself. Didn't come out as such, but didn't hide it, and some people knew about the newspaper article, some people didn't. I mean, this was 5 years after the newspaper article, so it was still kind of local news, if you like. Worked for an amazing head teacher who was lesbian, wasn't out, But you know, we had a good friendship, and I had, again, five happy years at George Tomlinson. It was nice to move to a school where I could really be myself and not care, and you know, it was great. Five lovely years. So in 2006, April 2006, went for an interview at a school literally about 5 minutes away from George Tomlinson, so still in Leytonstone. This was Jenny Hammond Primary School. Went for an interview for deputy head, and got it, and ended up after Easter 2006 in Jenny Hammond in this new management position. Literally about 2 weeks after I joined the school, I was approached by a lecturer working at the Institute of Education, Dr. Elizabeth Atkinson, and she wanted to interview me as my experiences of a gay teacher, so I did an interview with her. And then she happened to mention that she was going to be starting a literacy-based project called No Outsiders, and this was a 28-month project using picture books to challenge homophobia in primary schools. And I absolutely jumped at the chance of being involved in this. And because the school was very literacy based, they'd never done the literacy hour. And if you don't know what that is, go and search it, because it was vile. They'd never done the literacy hour. They'd immersed themselves in books and did all their learning from books, and it was a breath of fresh air. George Tomlinson, my previous school, had done the literacy hour, and it was awful. I hated it. Very prescriptive learning, and never ever reading whole books, and it was awful. Whoever thought that kids should experience literacy that way had no idea about kids and books and anything really. Anyway, Jenny Hammond was the exact opposite to that, and the head teacher was very much literacy focused, and I just happened to pass her in the corridor one day between classes and meetings and stuff, and I just said, I've been invited to take part in this project. It's using picture books, and she just said, yeah, let's do it, not wanting to know anything more about it, just yeah, let's do it. And Deborah, the head teacher, was an advocate for me, an advocate for my work, and an advocate for what I really believed in. She was absolutely, and still is, absolutely incredible. One of the most inspirational people I've ever known and ever worked for, and I was really proud to work and manage the school with her. Absolutely brilliant. So so I took part in the No Outsiders project, and this was where what was to shape the rest of my life up to this point and beyond. So we were all given £250 worth of picture books. I say all. There were 16 schools across the country doing this. So all the schools doing it were given £250 worth of these amazing books, and we were told to do things with it, whatever we wanted. And one of the books was And Tango Makes Three, and we wrote an opera about it, as you do, with my music background, and the kids performed this opera, and we took it out on a tour of local secondaries, which was brilliant. There was backlash. Some of it came from the most unexpected sources. There were a couple of teachers from a very fundamentalist religious background who were strongly opposed to this work. They didn't want their children learning that it was okay to be gay. And for the first time in my life, I actually stood up for myself and said, actually, I'm not going to accept that. That's not unacceptable behaviour, and put an official complaint in via the NUT at the time, and these two teachers were officially warned to keep their views to themselves. and that this is what the school stood for, and we were going to do this work. And Deborah, as I said, was my advocate. She was absolutely brilliant. And most of the staff, apart from these two, most of the staff were fully behind it as well. We did a lot of work with Stonewall at this time as well, and were really pioneers for doing this kind of work in effectively challenging homophobia through picture books, and it was brilliant. We had 6 parents who had an issue with it, but we were open and transparent, told them what we were doing, showed them our activity plans, showed them the books, and 5 out of the 6 went away happy. The other parent we didn't see again, but there you go. So academic research came out of the Now Outsiders project, as much as learning and publishing activities that we'd done that were successful. I'm not academic, sort of university academic, so a lot of the language that was being used in these books was well beyond me. I, up until this point, had never heard of heteronormativity, and now of course I can talk about it confidently. But it was very interesting working with academic researchers on the impact of this work, which was wide-ranging and still continues to influence me even now. So here we have Tango, our opera, and this book is apparently the most banned book in American literature, or at least maybe it was during the previous administration with the Orange Man in the White House, whose name I still can't bring myself to say. True story of 2 penguins, not gay as such, as far as we know, but 2 same-sex penguins who were demonstrating affection for each other, were demonstrating sort of nesting abilities of penguins. The keeper gave them a spare penguin egg that was just that. I mean, this is how you do learning, isn't it? From books like this. Apparently, penguins only ever lay 1 egg. These 2 penguins laid 2 eggs. So there was a spare egg that was given to Roy and Silo to hatch. They hatched it, they built a nest, and the baby penguin was called Tango. What I don't tell the kids after I read this story is that Roy and Silo have gone on to have heterosexual relationships. I think it would traumatise many of the children I read this story to. Anyway, but Tango is still there. There are stories that surface now and then, quite frequently and mainly about same-sex penguins having relationships, and I think it's lovely. It's a true story, so quite why it's seen as something that undermines the fabric of the family, I don't get it. Families, as we know and value, come in all shapes and sizes, and this is just one of them, and done in context, there should be no problems, should there, really? But it's a lovely book. If you don't know it, go and have a go and find it. It's absolutely brilliant. Love it. Round about this time, I married my husband. We were civilly partnered, and there we are, Walthamstow Registry Office. We had our honeymoon in New York, which was lovely. I also graduated from my NPQH, my National Professional Qualification for Headship, and started looking for headships. And ended up looking around Derbyshire for headships, which was strange. Didn't get any of them, which was fortuitous, because it then led me to leave London and move up to Derbyshire. We adopted 2 children, our lovely boys, in 2014, and very quickly decided that we wanted them to grow up in a safer environment, and decided that we wanted to live in Derbyshire because we'd visited Derbyshire many times, and loved it, fell in love with the county, fell in love with the people, and so we moved up. I took a year out, which was great, and then collected together all my lesson plans that I'd written to go with those books from Now Outsiders, and was invited to talk at a conference about role models. It just so happened that there were 2 members of staff from Derbyshire LGBT+ doing another workshop, and I went to their workshop and introduced myself and said, I've got these lesson plans, are you interested? They said, absolutely, we want to publish them. And then about a year later, they were good to their word, true to their word, and they published my resource, which is Kings, Princesses, Ducks and Penguins. It's now in its 3rd edition. And you know, this has gone out nationally to schools and parents groups and nurseries and all sorts of places, and it's something I do a lot of training on, and love talking about it. Love talking about how books can change lives, this very much is where I am now. I am at Derbyshire LGBT+. I'm doing training. I'm living a life really where every experience that I've had, everything I've spoken to you about today, has kind of led me to this point. Obviously didn't see that at the time, and wouldn't want any child to go through what I went through at school and subsequent settings, but it's shaped me into the person I am now. And it's so empowering for me to go and talk to groups of kids and teachers and say, I'm John and I'm gay, and I hope I am the person that I needed when I was at school. I hope I'm the role model that I needed when I was younger. And that's, you know, it drives me. That is what I do my work for. And I love my job. I love the team I work with. And how many people can say that about their jobs? How many people can say they work with some of their best friends? And you know, Derbyshire LGBT+ is an amazing charity, and we are here to support LGBT+ communities across Derbyshire, but also nationally. And to go back to the beginning, good times and bum times, you've heard about them all, and my dear, I'm still here. Thank you for your kind attention. Do please get in touch with me at D+. If there's anything that I've spoken about that you're interested in, or if you want to know more, D+ is here for you. You're never alone.